Let's talk about Marseille. Marseille has a reputation of being the most dangerous city in all of Europe. What does that mean, though? It's also the oldest and sometimes considered Paris's grittier older cousin. Frankly, I liked the vibe there better than I liked in Paris. It is a truly international place to visit. People have referred to it as both crunchy, gritty, a little dirtier, but also sparkling in personality. My husband and I traveled there at the end of our trip to France, and we were only able to stay one day and overnight because we had to catch a train back to Paris for our flight home. I can safely say that Marseille has a lot to offer. So let's get into it. We hadn't planned at all to visit Marseille when we went on our trip to France and Italy, but because of the rail strikes while we were there and the fact that we were traveling with a Eurail pass, we ended up having to get a connecting train back to Paris from Marseille instead of our original plans, which was to take a sleeper train from Nice. We only saw Nice in the night, and we had to head straight on to Marseille the next day, and then the following day after that we would take our train back to Paris. So it was an addition to our original itinerary, but we went with it, and I'm glad we did. We arrived by train in very early afternoon. I think it was like June 8th. And one of the first things we noticed before we even got off the train was kind of an uptick in the graffiti we were seeing on the backs of some buildings. You know, trains don't tend to go through the prettiest parts of town. You see the backs of a lot of stuff. It wasn't just graffiti tags, though. This was actually graffiti art, much of it. Some of it was still ugly, but much of it was really artsy. It felt kind of alive and intentional. Marseille is a city full of art, with a population of about 900,000 people. It is the second largest city in France behind Paris. Lyon and Toulouse keep bouncing back and forth and fighting over who's going to be third and fourth. I think Toulouse is starting to pass Lyon in that capacity. Because we only had that afternoon and evening, we checked into our hotel that was very close to the train station, which itself is right smack in the thick of things. And when we saw the door to our room, we had to laugh. I'll show it to you. Even if you got to the hotel and were nearly blind drunk, there was no way you were not going to see that room number. After settling our luggage in, we asked the hotel front desk guy what we should do since we only had that afternoon and evening. And he said, well, if that's all the time you have, you really should just go to the old port. And that is a big, giant port on the Mediterranean that houses a huge amount of boats, but has tons of walkways around it and lots of streets shooting off of it, taking you to different restaurants and shops and just a very vibrant area. It's like kind of the center hub of everything going on. He also said, it's several blocks, but I'll show you how to get on the blue line of the metro, and you can get straight down to the port very quickly, so you've got a lot more time to walk around. I'm pretty sure that he also told us how to purchase tickets and everything. I mean, he was really nice, and he told us exactly where to go. The metro was only about a block from the entrance to the hotel. That metro line took us right to the port. I'm going to be showing you pictures that I took in and around the port the whole time I'm talking here. There were just some beautiful scenes. All in all, we found that everyone we spoke to in Marseille was super nice. Yes, I've said that about everywhere we've gone. I've said that people were nice in Paris and in Annecy and in other places that we stopped. But Marseille was a different kind of nice. You know, I feel like it was less formal and much more casual and friendly, and it just had a really cool vibe. The people there were much more casual and laid back, and much more inclined to say hello and talk to you. Plus, just so you know, the bonjour effect is real, y'all. That means no matter where you go, everywhere you go in France, no matter where you walk in, it could be a doctor's office, it could be an emergency room, it could be a restaurant, a grocery store, anything, you say bonjour. And then they'll appreciate your trying to stumble through other French things. We also took in, as we were looking around, the huge diversity of people in this place. Marseille is definitely a big melting pot of people from all over the world, especially Greek, Italian, North African, and a lot of influx of West African people, and there's a huge influx now of people coming from Central America and Mexico. So various cultures of foods were also seen all over the place as we looked around and as we were walking through and seeing the markets. I did a little research because I'm very interested in wherever we end up. I would like to be able to find the ingredients that I need to cook Mexican food. And I'm not talking old El Paso here either. So I did a little research and found that there are tons of international markets in Marseille. Many of them catering to North African, Indian, some Central American Mexican, and some Asian. So there are an abundance of markets where I might be able to find things that I like cilantro and certain sorts of chilies that are more Mexican than French. And I also noticed that the palates in Marseille seem to be more international as well. So you can get authentic flavors from various countries instead of toned down flavors, let's just say. It's also full of artists and artisans. And yes, it doesn't seem as polished and clean as a lot of the other cities in France. Like Lyon, for example, is just so polished and even to the white looking sidewalks. It is grittier. It's a little dirtier. I mean, it's still clean compared to here and compared to other places. But like I said, it has kind of a very crunchy, hippie sort of vibe, and I really liked that about the place. I say crunchy because that's kind of always the way I felt about Durham, North Carolina, where I live now. Well, I lived near or in Durham for the last 20 years. Sadly, Durham is losing some of that crunch, thanks to gentrification, revitalization, and large corporations building expensive condo high-rises for the people moving in and getting wealthy on their startups. I mean, there's one high-rise that just went up. The smaller apartments are still just under $1 million, $900,000. So what happens then, as you know, is that the people who've lived there for generations get pushed out because they're priced out. I used to joke that whenever you see a hot yoga place moving in somewhere, you know gentrification is well on the way. As a lot of my non-white friends have said, you guys might like to call it revitalization. We call it relocation. Unfortunately, France isn't immune to that either. And Marseille has suffered from gentrification as well. One of the most artsy districts in Marseille, which has big, beautiful murals on nearly every wall as you walk through. And it's full of artisanal shops now. This neighborhood has been gentrified. A lot of Marseille has been gentrified. And of course, when gentrification happens, the people who can no longer afford to live there get pushed out into outer neighborhoods. That happens to be in the northern part of Marseille, where a lot of apartment blocks are, and a lot of the more working class people who can't afford to live in the center of the city live. And that's where more of the crime happens, because you know and I know that crime doesn't have anything to do with the color of someone's skin. It has to do with poverty and being kept in poverty. These apartment blocks have a reputation for gang violence and drug dealing. The reputation isn't really undeserved. However, the crime rate has gone down since 2023. So since we're in that, let's talk about the crime rates between Marseille, the most dangerous city in France, and Durham, North Carolina. Durham is much smaller at under 200,000 people. Marseille is 900,000 people, but we'll count by crimes committed inside a group of 100,000 people. I will put up a little scale as I'm talking. It'll probably cover my face because it's a long ways. I made a little table. In Durham, there were 636 violent crimes committed per every 100,000 people. Now this includes violent crimes, murder, rape, domestic violence, anything that involves violence. And so 636 out of 100,000 people, to me, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot. And part of it is, here in the United States, we live in a gun culture. Durham also used to have a gang violence and drug problem as well, and still to some extent does, though it's not nearly what it was when I first moved here. So compare that, 636 out of 100,000 people. Marseille has 5 to 6 homicides every 100,000 people. All violent crime, including homicides, is about 15 to every 100,000 people. So 636 as opposed to 15 seems like I live in a much more dangerous place than Marseille could ever be, right now at least. But I think a lot of the talk about how scary it is undeserved. When I looked at nonviolent crimes, I had a hard time digging out like percentages in Marseille. They just have a different way of scaling things, so it was tough to tell. However, it seemed to me that nonviolent crimes seem to run kind of about the same. Burglaries and breaking into cars or theft or things like that. Now, I know that in Marseille, just as in every other larger city, there are a lot of pickpockets. And just like in Paris and in all the other big cities, you need to make sure and have your items with you. Crossbody bag, arm over the bag. Make sure pickpockets don't have a way to reach into anything without you noticing. Wear a money belt under your shirt. Do those kinds of things to keep your stuff safe, and leave your passport locked in a safe in your hotel. Because I mean, you should have a photocopy of your passport that you can keep with you, so you can pull it out if there happens to be some kind of legal problem, or if a cop happens to want to see it, that kind of thing. But otherwise, you don't need to carry your passport everywhere you go. If you do, make sure you're keeping it in a very safe place on your person. So while people in Europe might see Marseille as a very scary, violent, crime-ridden place, the statistics still put it far below US crime rates in cities. In a little while, we'll look at other comparisons like cost of living, utilities, etc. Anyway, back to fun. We wandered in and around the old port. We just would take a street and go around and take a different street back toward the port. It was beautiful. I mean, the buildings were nice, the shops were all open and in great shape, and we had a good time. Stopped for a snack in the afternoon. I think we got gelato. And Marseille is down on the coast, relatively not far from Italy, so a lot of Italian stuff ends up there too, and a lot of Italian immigrants live there. When it was nearing dinner time, we decided that even though there was a lot of great multicultural food there, we wanted our last dinner in France to be French. We did find a traditional French restaurant, a little more upscale, but we decided, again, it was our last meal, our last dinner in France. We weren't going to be able to have a nice dinner out when we got back to Paris, because we needed to immediately get to the airport. We would have chosen a patio seat. However, there was a lot of loud noise coming from just across the lane. This was a pedestrian area, and it was a very wide pedestrian walking area. So there were two pubs we were on a corner facing the port, so we could see all the water, but there were two pubs right across from us that looked like they were watching either, I don't remember, it was some kind of sports ball, probably rugby or soccer, because they're really big on European football there. They have their teams, they dress in their white with blue trim outfits, and they are fiercely loyal to their teams. We just noticed a lot of loud behavior, and it looked like, for some reason, there were two opposing groups in these two pubs. It looked like they were jeering at each other a little bit. And one guy even ran over, and this was funny but unpleasant, ran over to our side, turned toward us so he could drop his pants and moon the guys across the street, which meant that we got full frontal. It was not pleasant. We asked to be seated inside. So I had steak tartare and with French fries and a salad, and it was delicious, but I ended up being a little bit jealous. My husband got steak au poivre, which is very peppered, black peppered steak, and actually it's usually white pepper steak that's just super, super peppery in a creamy sauce, and he had like little roasted new potatoes that were in that sauce as well, and his looked really good. Like I said, I was jealous. I got a bite or two. It was just right for a final French meal. While we ate and we were walking around as the sun was starting to set, there was an increasing police presence on our side, the side of the port we were on. And I was just like, I wonder, is it just an increasing police presence because it's twilight? And And because, in the evening is when people get drunk and obnoxious and loud, we started to feel almost slightly uncomfortable because the soccer team fans were getting a little louder and a little more verbal, let's just say. And some were even like, they'd start to cheer, and one guy would lift his chair above his head and cheer with his chair over his head like that. Like that was just an extra good play. So we thought, let's just walk to the opposite side of the port. There was a big giant Ferris wheel over there. So we decided to walk over there, and we ended up deciding to take a little Ferris wheel ride. It was running, and we thought, what better way to see the views of Marseille than from the top of a Ferris wheel? So I took a whole lot of pictures. It was a long ride too, because there wasn't a line to get on. And so the guy kept us up there for a long time. We were allowed to stay, going around. It went around very slowly, but we were allowed up for a long time. And when they started to load the cars opposite us, they left us up there sitting while they unloaded and reloaded those cars on the opposite side. So I got a lot of really good pictures, and it was panoramic view because we could see all the way around us. So
on the top of the Ferris wheel in Marseille.
In case you want the info.
I took a lot of photos. They had their giant Notre Dame Cathedral up at the top of a hill. It looked almost like it was on an island. I don't know if it was a peninsula or on an actual island. And I took a lot of photos of just the city surrounding, and you could see the mountains back behind the city. Marseille is kind of tucked between mountains and the Mediterranean. So it reminded me a little bit, not the architecture, but a little bit of Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which is also tropical rainforest, city, ocean, Pacific Ocean. Other than that, there's no other comparisons, however. So we really enjoyed the Ferris wheel, and like I said, I've been showing you snaps of stuff all along, and enjoyed the sights that we could see. I did a little extra investigating and finding photos, free photos from Pixabay as well, of places we didn't get to go see that were just beautiful. There were gardens and fountains and sculptures everywhere. So I'm looking very forward to one day being able to go back for longer than one afternoon and evening to be able to really explore. One thing that was really sad was when I was investigating or researching for this video, I found that in 2022 they dismantled that Ferris wheel and have no plans to put one back there again. So it kind of makes me sad because that we'll never get that panoramic view again, and other people don't get it either. Anyway, we walked back after the Ferris wheel ride. It was starting to get dark, and we knew we needed to get up early the next morning. So we walked back to the metro and went down into the metro station to get our tickets back. And this was the mural that was over the tracks of the metro station on the returning line. And we were joking around because those jumping silhouettes, that was right over the tracks. So it looked like they were suicidal and jumping into the tracks out of that mural. But that was fun. But anyway, it was really cool though to see that there was art everywhere, even in the metro tunnels. So we definitely found our room when we got back to the hotel. Easy peasy. But everything else I'm going to tell you is based on research because, as I said, we weren't able to see so much stuff. I used Numbeo, which is a site for comparing cost of living, for a lot of these figures. So be aware that much of the information that Numbeo collects, it's kind of like Wikipedia. People who actually live in the places they're collecting information on are who are providing that information. So you're relying on averages based on how many people have talked about a certain place or a certain thing. So, if there are over 500 people that have contributed information, that's a better that gives a better idea of the percentage of how close they are to being correct, is what I'm saying. Oh, that's another thing I want to say before I do this. One thing that you need to know too is that one of the reasons Marseille isn't like the rest of the French Riviera area, like the beautiful Côte d'Azur and Nice and Cannes and all of these places that attract the famous people, the celebrities, it's not smack up against Monaco, and Marseille is proud. It is still a thriving fishing port and community. So there are fishermen and women every day in those ports who have gone out fishing before dawn and who are back in the mornings at those ports selling their fish. So fresh food everywhere. Okay, now let's look at restaurant comparables to start with. So I'm looking at the chart, and I'll put it up here too. For restaurants in Durham, North Carolina, a meal at an inexpensive restaurant would run about $15 per person. And we're talking an inexpensive restaurant, like we have a local place called the Wooden Nickel Pub. That's an inexpensive restaurant. Their burgers run from $13 to $15, and they're nice, good burgers. And so that's kind of what we're talking about is $15 without alcohol at an inexpensive restaurant. In Marseille, an inexpensive restaurant, and remember, you're still tipping, even at inexpensive restaurants. So onto that $15 average, add a 20% tip. I'm not going to do the math this time. And in Marseille, the same type of restaurant is about $17.55. But again, you're not adding a tip to that. It's not a tipping culture. So keep that in mind when we're looking at these prices. Same with a meal for 2 people at a mid-range restaurant, 3 courses. So we're talking an appetizer, a main, and a dessert. Okay? Or something of that nature. In Durham, for 2 people, the average for a mid-range restaurant, and we're talking mid-range like Chili's, or those mid-range Carrabba's, those mid-range chain restaurants. So we're talking $75 for a 3-course meal. This does not include alcohol, and this does not include tip. So don't forget to add that 20% tip to the top of that $75, and then you will see that the $80.15 meal at a mid-range restaurant in Marseille is still lower cost because you're not being made to tip on top of that. So while it might say that it's 17% higher in Marseille for a meal for 1, or for an inexpensive restaurant, or it's 6.9% higher for mid-range restaurant and 3 courses, keep in mind that you're not counting a tip on the Durham side. So it still ends up balancing out pretty well. All right, let's move on to something else, and then I will give you what we've decided. Can we afford it? Is it on our top places we would like to live, etc. So let's look at rent. And again, this is taken off Numbeo, so grain of salt, but these are pretty decent averages. So a 1-bedroom apartment in the center of Durham is going to run you $1,800 to $2,000. I've been looking. And so downtown Durham, that's what you're going to get. 1-bedroom apartment for $2,000 a month, or $1,800 to $2,000 a month. In Marseille, a 1-bedroom apartment, probably going to be a little smaller in square footage because everything's a little smaller in square footage, will run you about $790 to $800 a month. Again, it's a little bit smaller space, city center, but look at the difference. That's less than half of what rent in downtown Durham would cost. Outside of the city center, a 1-bedroom apartment, similar size in Durham, is $1,433 average. And that's a pretty good average because we lived 8 years ago. We were in a small, very small 2-bedroom apartment and before we bought our house, and it was small square footage, and they were getting ready to jack our prices up to $1,400 a month, and that was 8 years ago. That was before the housing and rent bubble. So I'm sure they're charging $1,500, $1,600 now for that same apartment. And then a 1-bedroom outside of the center. Oh, wait, where are we? Yeah, outside of the center in Marseille. So in the suburbs of Marseille, you're looking at $650 basically dollars a month. A 3-bedroom apartment in the city center of Durham is going to cost you $2,600 or more. And in Marseille will be $1,411. 3-bedroom in city center. Outside of the center, Durham is still going to cost you actually it looks like the averages outside of the center, like in South Durham, where we lived in that expensive apartment, it looks like it's even more expensive than downtown. So the big question, could we live there? If my husband were hired for a job there, sure. I'm sure we'd find a good neighborhood and a nice place to live. However, it is the second largest city in France, and it did feel a little too big and overwhelming for us. Also, Marseille, because of where it sits, right between the mountains and the Mediterranean, is also being affected by crazy storms and climate change. Just recently, in the last few months, they've had torrential rainstorms and flash flooding that has rushed through the town, and it was crazy. It looked really rough. It damaged a lot of people's homes. It made me think a little bit, it wasn't as grave as what happened in western North Carolina here in the Asheville Black Mountain area, but it was still a lot of water rushing through those streets and into the old port. So there was a lot of damage that happened. So that's another question that we need to ask ourselves. All in all, while we really liked the vibe, we also kind of felt like this was a city for the young. Where you look at Nice, and it's kind of a city where lots and lots of Americans, especially Americans from Florida, retire to. Marseille is more of that melting pot, cosmopolitan, we're going to go clubbing, we're going to party, we're going to watch our sports and all cheer together, and it unites us, and all of that stuff. And we just felt like it was a little too much, I guess. It's full of life, it's vibrant, great food scene, great place to visit, but I feel like it was probably just too much for us to want to live there. A little too busy, a little too noisy. Oh, incidentally, fun story. When we got home from our trip, we found out that the police presence had grown because those little warring factions of footballers decided to get into a big old fight after the game. And so the police were there because they expected it. So we were glad that we left when we did. We did like Marseille enough that we are going to be looking more closely at other places near, other smaller places nearby, like Avignon, which is about an hour north of Marseille. It's inland, but it's still that Mediterranean climate. And like Arles, which is another place near Avignon, which is where Vincent van Gogh spent several years and painted 300 of his paintings. And so we'll be looking at those places too, because the life and the vibrancy and the multiculturalism that were in Marseille are enough of a draw for us to make us interested in potentially wanting to live near there one day. It actually made me think twice about writing it off. So I hope you've enjoyed this walk down memory lane with me. Please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more of our decluttering and dreaming and departing for France. Oh, and if you're still here with me, let me know in the comments what you think about me maybe doing some live chats here in the near future. From here on out, though, it's more of an armchair exploration for me. We're not planning a scouting trip before we move. We're relying on where we've been in the past and where we're researching and talking to people now. One of the things I love about us being such a small world is that there are so many groups of people that live in different places in France that we can make friends from here and make acquaintances with people and get their take on where they live and how they like it and what things they like the best, so we can make it match our own. So like I said, let me know in the comments if you think a live would be fun. One of the reasons we're doing this is because we're not planning on buying property, at least for a few years once we've moved, because we want to make sure we're in the right place and we buy in a place that we want to live the rest of our lives. We may just rent forever. I don't know. We are planning on staying there for the rest of our lives. We're not moving like some people feel like they're escaping from the United States, but they're not looking at running towards something. They're just escaping, and we're not planning on coming back if things change again and look brighter here. It's because it's not that's pushing us. Yes, some of those things, including what's going on in this country right now, have influenced us to move up our plans. But other things have made us want to move up our plans too. We've lost a couple of really good friends and people who didn't get to live out a long retirement, who passed away far too young. And we realized that we don't know how much time we have, so we want to get moving with this second act. Also, down below, if you're a woman who is 45 plus and you are tired of not being able to be the creative self you were when you were younger, head down to my group. It's free, a free community where we journal our way through some tough questions and problems, and we also are learning to sketch and do sketching because that also raises dopamine in the brain and helps us reconnect with our creativity. So that's in the description down below. Anyway, thank you again for hanging out with me, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.